Hello, everyone. My name is Mary Magnuson, and I work for the Blandin Foundation as administrator of the Blandin Community Broadband Program. It's my pleasure today to welcome you to the sixth in our Broadband Leadership webinar series on creating successful broadband infrastructure projects. Today, we have ownership models and provider partnerships. We're offering these webinars to community leaders interested in learning about broadband infrastructure, project planning, best practices, and tips for partnering effectively with ISPs and units of government, working with broadband consultants, and successfully applying for public funds. So let's get started. Today's moderator is Bill Coleman of Community Technology Advisors, one of our primary broadband program consultants. He will set the stage for today's webinar and introduce the speakers. Bill?
Thank you, Mary. Thanks everyone for joining today. We appreciate your participation, and I think today is going to be a great event. I'm going to lead off today with providing a little framework for the discussion. We'll primarily hear from Joe Buttweiler from CTC, a telecommunications cooperative in Brainerd, Minnesota, and two of their community partners. Rick Utek of Todd County Economic Development Authority and John Rodemaker from City of Little Falls. And so we'll just jump right in. So thank you very much. I've shown this little graphic before. You know, our objective is to get from poor broadband to great broadband. And that sounds pretty easy, pretty simplistic, but we know that the process is much more detailed. And I encourage you to take a look at this graphic. It's available online on the Blandin website, I think from the first webinar. And I think it provides a pretty good understanding of the steps necessary. We know, and we'll hear about some of these steps that communities took today to get where they are today, and maybe in some cases continuing to do that. But in real life, this would have a lot more arrows. Your own example may require going back to the start multiple times or repeating things, or sometimes you'll be lucky, you'll be able to jump ahead in the process when you have a great city council or county board or a great provider partner. And so encourage you to look at that. When we talk about provider partnerships and ownership models, this is something that is really determined throughout the process, that communities are making a variety of choices. They're gaining more information, and really that partnership model really is not really set until we get to the end, when you negotiate that deal structure with the provider partner and how that structure will actually end up in reality and function. And so that's really important, not necessarily to have a fixed understanding of how you're going to get this done until you need to make those choices. I would not eliminate choices that could be very valuable to you. And I think in Minnesota, we have a tendency to jump pretty conservatively to local governments not wanting to have as an active role somehow, that if the less they can do is the better. And that could be true for your community, but I would just encourage you to consider all the options and consider the benefits of different approaches. So what's the right ownership partnership model for you, for your community? Again, sometimes we see it as a public or a private choice. And many times people say, well, we want it to be private sector driven. And again, that's fine, but there's a lot of choices in between those options. So community engagement level, many communities are engaged in the planning of broadband networks. That's what all of this is about. If we just left it to telecom providers to come and solve your problem, many communities would be waiting a long time. One of the things about community involvement in planning is we've seen that projects tend to be larger. They tend to be more inclusive, covering all of a township or all of a county, as opposed to just a provider edging out. So we've all been engaged in this broadband planning to gather data and statistics and do the feasibility studies that we're going to talk about more next week. Increasingly, we're seeing finance as a standard practice for local communities, local counties, townships, that as the need for subsidy increases with the more and more and more rural areas that we're trying to provide with quality broadband service, public finance is important. We know that we started with the state of Minnesota's finance program and their grant program, but now we've seen that has really merged or emerged as more of a stool, three-legged stool of state funding, local funding, and provider funding. And so we see communities more and more involved in that finance side. Ownership then is a big leap for communities to get their hands around. The idea that a community would own that infrastructure we've seen some projects at the state level that with state grants where providers are using a variety of public funds that may approach 90% of a project cost. At a certain point, I think it begins to make sense that if the public is going to put that much money in, maybe they should own that network. And we're going to talk about some of the advantages of owning the network. Many times, the private sector will say, oh, this is too difficult for the public sector, it's too complicated, and so on. But the public owns a lot of infrastructure, road systems, water systems, sewer systems, stormwater, all kinds of systems of owning that infrastructure. Infrastructure is a long-term asset. When we finance it, using bonds to finance infrastructure is common. So a 10-year, 20-year a plan to finance an asset. Back in my economic development finance days, the National Development Council Finance Program emphasized, matched the term of the loan to the life of the asset. And that really is hard for a publicly traded company to do because they want to start returning a big return on investment as quickly as possible. The public sector can be a lot more patient and think about operating or owning this over a longer period of time. And then finally, operating a network. We see communities do that. We've got the city of Windham, we've got Southwest Broadband Services, Barnesville Telephone Company, which is a city-owned network. Cities all over the country own and operate networks, so they can do it, but that is another step. And one of the things that I see in the telecom business, you see providers trying to get bigger and bigger so that they can have efficiencies of scale in marketing and operations and billing and all these systems that are required to actually operate a telecom network. So some communities choose to own a network, but hire somebody to operate that. And that would be the four pieces of this puzzle. When people think about what are the benefits of community ownership, I bundle that in with, these are also negotiable community benefits that if you're in a public-private partnership, that you can start to negotiate with providers as the partnership emerges. So you don't necessarily have to own it, but you can get some of these benefits if you think about what it is you want up front. And when the provider's looking for your dollars, that's the right time really to negotiate some of these items. Communities can really emphasize low cost, high value benefit. For example, things like dark fiber. When a company is deploying a fiber network, they generally put in excess fiber through the network because it's just as easy to put in a bundle of 96 fibers as it is to put in a bundle of 48 fibers. That additional fiber is relatively low cost and provides a lot of safety margin for new things, new markets happening over time. That's why providers put in the excess fiber, because you don't want to have to go back in to put new fiber in. But that dark fiber can really, if a city says, well, we want a dozen fibers throughout the network, that can be possible at relatively low cost to the construction costs. So smart city applications, whether it's street lighting or stoplights, water systems, drainage, all these things where we're talking about having sensors in the ground or in the network for various applications. If you had to go buy those from the provider after the fact, getting a connection each time, communities are unlikely to actually do that kind of innovative work because of the connectivity costs. If you already own dark fiber throughout the network, that you've eliminated a lot of that cost. We see incentives for economic development, and Scott County is probably the leader in this, where they have got a big fiber network. They can essentially give away fiber optic connectivity in and around Scott County, and even leading to downtown Minneapolis to the 511 building. And those benefits are huge in terms of the companies that are coming to the community, but relatively low cost once you have this fiber network. The ability to deploy Wi-Fi in downtown and parks is enhanced when you own that connectivity yourself. When we think about disaster recovery and data management, when telecom providers are building facilities with power backup and servers and so on, getting some space in those locations for that secure data storage can be important. And US Ignite has a program actually coming up very soon talking about the way that they use these connections to national internet hubs to make themselves a more tech-savvy community. When we think about fiber, we're thinking about a 30-year investment. And so what are the applications we'll be running in 30 years? That's something to think about. And how can you bring those easily to your community? Again, having some fiber in the network that is owned by the public, controlled by the public, that's one way to do that. And a second piece of this is to enable a competitive environment. We've talked throughout this process that choosing a broadband provider partner isn't like going to the prom. It's more of a marriage. It's a long-term kind of relationship. If you have some fiber in the network that you control as a community, that means that you can help facilitate additional competition in the future. And that's all part of the negotiation. And then finally, digital equity, a way to provide discounted subscriptions for low-income families, access at key community locations. Certainly the pandemic has emphasized, has magnified the issues around digital equity. And so having some of these negotiated benefits, whether that is dark fiber or whether it's just subscriptions, agreements with the provider in advance can yield these benefits. And then just a little bit about the competition piece. Many times, if a provider owns that network, they're going to be the single provider on that network. If the community owns the network, they can negotiate a short-term exclusive access with their original provider partner, and maybe say a 5-year window where they'll are guaranteed to be the exclusive provider on the network. But if you own that network, if that provider isn't doing the job you want them to do, there's opportunities to bring in additional providers. And that'd be more of an open access network model where multiple providers providing service over the same network is the case. And so with that, I'm going to introduce Joe Buttweiler. And Joe has got a unique position, I think, in the Minnesota broadband community as a manager of community partnerships with CTC. CTC is really committed to that idea of community partnerships and has executed a fair number of different structures to facilitate that partnership with communities. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Joe. Joe, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, you're welcome. Nice to be here. I guess nice to be here from my house. And I'll just kind of talk over a few slides and thoughts, ways that we think about partnerships at CTC. And if you have any questions along the way, feel free to maybe just put them in the chat box and I'll see them there. And we can answer those at the end so we don't start talking over one another. Let me share my screen. All right, so these kind of represent a number of the things that we think about at CTC when we look to engage with a community, or a community is maybe reaching out to us to engage with them. And I guess just for definition, when I say community, to us that could mean a county, a grouping of counties, townships, city. Oftentimes it's a lake association, a neighborhood. So really any type of entity, there's no definition to us. But first and foremost, we always look for eagerness, energy, and involvement of the community. This is really broadband. As much as we all feel passionately about it and think that everyone needs it, and I really believe that, and we're seeing that today, but it's not a field of dreams. It's not a let's make a multi-million-dollar investment and hope they connect to this network. There's just way too much money and investment involved to think that people are just magically going to switch from the incumbent telephone or fixed wireless or cable company to a fiber provider, even when it's priced very competitively. When people need to change from one provider to another, there's always a percentage of the population that says they're going to switch, but then when it comes time to it, it's difficult to be home and schedule that installation at your house. So really seeing involvement from communities is really encouraging to a provider, especially to CTC. That can't understate that enough, that if you only have 2 or 3 people that are really championing the effort, it looks like there's 2 or 3 people involved and not the entire community really pushing for this. Then we start talking about what type of, yeah.
Your PowerPoint is in preview mode.
Oh, well, look at that.
Yeah, sorry.
That's interesting.
I know.
So
Bill.
Joe, on mine, it's up in the top left when you it says use slideshow mode.
Yeah, I'm in slideshow mode.
Oh, weird.
So,
Okay.
but as long as you can see the factors in determining structures and strategy, I think we're fine.
Yep.
So, the type of broadband services, we believe in fiber. There's maybe a place for fixed wireless, and fixed wireless certainly has areas where it works better than others. Typically where CTC offers services amongst the trees and hills and lakes. We've dabbled in a number of fixed wireless deployments and we struggle with it. We see fixed wireless signals reflecting off of lakes. We see interference from different iron concentrates and rocks, trees, hills. Line of sight is an issue. So we are a believer in fiber. We believe it is the only future-proof technology that exists today, and that's proven. So if a community is really not to the point of believing that fiber is right for them, then we would typically encourage that community to go through a process and determine what do they want long-term. Do you just want a service right now? Or do you want a service that's future-proof and a service that meets or exceeds our 2026 speed goal? Today, our state speed goal in 2026 is 100 megabits download by 20 megabits upload, but 2026 is not that far off, and I believe that we're going to have a future speed goal in the state that's going to be greater than 100 by 20. Then we start looking at funding sources, and funding sources from federal grants, state grants, Rick and John in a little bit might talk about how their projects, we partnered with them and funded those through various loans and other funding sources. We worked with some townships on the last state broadband grant program that one was going to issue bonds, another township was going to impose a levy to help finance construction of a network. So there's a lot of options out there, and each one needs to be evaluated. Then ownership of various assets. And as Billy alluded to, it's from our perspective, we really don't care who owns the fiber infrastructure. CTC wants to be in control of operating the network. That's our experience, and that's what we're subject matter experts at. We will operate it, we will manage it, we will offer the services, and we want to be in control of that customer support to make sure that our members have the best experience possible. But who owns the fiber asset? For us, sometimes it's advantageous for a local unit of government to just own it and for us to operate it, because we can use some of the low interest financing that local governments have. And then we'll enter into a lease agreement to repay that or a portion of that debt service. Existing resources, sometimes it's not realized, but your community, you might have a person who becomes a broadband champion who professionally writes grants. And all of the grant programs take a considerable amount of time and effort to assemble a great application, including a great narrative. And there's nobody better to write that narrative than the person who doesn't have service and the person who feels passionately about getting service into their community. And so those come in the form of writing the grants, but also assembling all the various letters of support and writing those letters of support that are critical in securing grant funds. In certain instances, if you're a city and you have a municipal power, I'll use the city of Ely as an example. We're working with the city of Ely to build fiber downtown. They have a city power company, so we're going to be placing fiber on the city of Ely poles. They're going to own the fiber, and CTC is going to end up leasing that fiber from the city of Ely. That avoids us having to get a new pole attachment agreement with the incumbent phone provider, which can be a challenging process, and utilize the pole attachment agreement that the city already has in place. And then we look at geographic location and the number of homes and businesses to be served. We are happy to consider building a project anywhere in Minnesota. We might be headquartered in the Brainerd Lakes area, but I just mentioned the city of Ely. We'd also be happy to work in Southwest and Southeast Minnesota. The challenge, of course, comes with starting up an operation and needing enough customers to start up an operation in a place that's not immediately adjacent to us. So that becomes a consideration. But there's other things that we might be considering as well. So for example, we had worked with some townships in southern Chisago County and continue to work with them. And if we started working with a community between Brainerd and those southern Chisago townships, we would say, hey, this gets us that much closer to building that link directly from Brainerd to southern Chisago County. So there can be other projects going on at CTC that if they're implemented could actually benefit the viability of us providing services to your community in the future. So never think that I'm too far away from that provider, even if it's not CTC. Reach out to the providers who you want to work with. You don't have to work with the one in your backyard. So a few examples, Arrowhead Electric Cooperative. They are located in Cook County in northeastern Minnesota. They own all the fiber infrastructure, and we essentially provide wholesale internet and voice services to them. They then rebrand it as True North Broadband and offer it to their cooperative members. We provide all the network, kind of the technical network maintenance, monitoring, and then we provide a lot of after-hours support to their members, or any cases of support that they can't handle, they might not have the technical expertise to handle that customer support call. If someone's having an issue, it gets transferred to our office and it gets answered as True North Broadband. Boys Fort, this is a tribal entity that was awarded state grant funds just in this past year, and we'll be constructing a network. We're kind of refining what the partnership will look like in that arrangement, but Boys Fort will own the fiber, and CTC will provide services over it. The local school district in Brainerd, this network throughout the Brainerd, Baxter, and Nisswa area, CTC has fiber that was originally funded by a school levy so that the schools could get connectivity directly between all of their buildings. The cities then joined into that and connected up all the city buildings, and some healthcare joined in and started connecting up healthcare. And then CTC provided funding so that we can build out to all the residents in Brainerd and Baxter. But really the start of that entire build throughout all of the Brainerd, Baxter, Nisswa area was the school district implementing a levy to build fiber to connect up all of their schools. And then more recently, we renewed a lease with the school district and added some additional routes and capacity to benefit them and to add more redundancy into the CTC network. So something that might start off seeming like it's just good for one entity like a school district can evolve and be good for an entire community. We work with a number of other ISPs where we provide them services. So an example might be we provide fiber connectivity to a number of fixed wireless providers so that they can offer services in other parts of Minnesota. As a reminder, all of this great wireless technology, it's great, but it all needs to be connected to fiber sometime. And so we provide a lot of those services to enable fixed wireless deployments in other parts of Minnesota. Obviously the city of Little Falls, and then the city of Long Prairie and Todd County, which I'm gonna not talk about right now, so I let John and Rick talk about those projects. And then we work with just a lot of other rural townships and small cities through the process of how to get broadband. And so I thought I would just quickly go through one tool that we use at CTC as we evaluate what the demand is for services in an area. And it's a tool that we will allow any community to work in conjunction with CTC on. And typically we don't charge a fee as long as we think that there's reasonable good faith by the community that they would work with CTC in the future to help get a broadband network constructed. So this is our crowd fiber tool. And this example on the screen is Greenwood Township, which actually sits right in the middle of the Boys Fort project area that we're constructing up on the south side of Lake Vermilion and a little bit northwest of that. So we created a splash page for them that just tells a little bit about why you're here and what you're doing, and shows the project area, or it could have any other type of image that you want. And you simply start out by entering your address and clicking go, and the next screen shows you a map, and you're verifying your location that yes, this is where my house or my business. And then we have them conduct a speed test. And so then that speed test helps us get some idea of what type of services they have at their home. The important thing to know about speed tests is that when you conduct a speed test, there's a lot of things that can impact the quality of the data. So if you're far away from your wireless router, your speed is going to be less. If you have an old router, you might not be able to maximize the capability of the service you're actually getting. So your speed test might actually be providing you false data. So speed tests you have to be very careful with because it's not precise data. And then optionally, we develop a custom questionnaire in conjunction with the community that we're working with. And so it can be a lot of different things. In the case of Greenwood Township, one of the questions we have is the person taking this survey a remote location? And by remote, they mean, are you located on an island in the middle of Lake Vermilion? Or are you located on another part of Lake Vermilion where there actually isn't road access to get there? And then fill in your information. And then on the back end, there's some examples here of we at CTC can see the location of everyone that has filled out that survey, and then we report on that data and provide it back to the community. So that is one of the first steps we like to take when working with the community is helping to survey what the actual demand is for services. And so with that, I can stop sharing my screen and turn it over to, I believe it's John.
John, you're muted. There he goes.
Okay.
Welcome, John.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Joe. The City of Little Falls is one of those partners with CTC, community partnerships. Back in 2014, our city, Economic Development Authority, the Initiative Foundation, North Central Economic Development Authority, and CEDA, which is the EDA arm of Region 5, as well as Community Development in Morrison County, all came together to fund a managed construction agreement with CTC to build out a fiber ring. And that was going to serve commercial industrial sections of Little Falls. And the primary driver for this was a business by the name of Atomic Learning, and now it goes by Who Knew It. But they're an educational software company, and they really had a high demand for high quality broadband and fiber infrastructure. And they were located in one of our industrial parks. So we came together, all portioned some of the funds out to fund about a $530,000 construction build out. And then it went live in 2014. After the build, we entered into a lease agreement with CTC, and part of that included a buyout agreement. And the lease agreement went to make payments towards the construction. And it was planned to have this lease agreement go for 15 years. Our other funding partners were the ones that were going to be paid off first, and then the city EDA was going to be the last one. So we were assuming most of the risk in this process. However, CTC had a lot of success with this build out and connections, and were able to execute the buyout agreement in December 2018. So we've actually now turned that ownership back over to CTC fully. Since that build out, the city is also engaged in connections to all of our city facilities. So we have about 8 different sites in town that we operate some level of internet or network, have network needs for, including our water towers, which have our collector information for our utility and our water meters. And we used to operate them with a fixed wireless signal. However, that was really problematic. At different times, we have a lot of tree cover throughout the city, and while they're still on the water towers, the makeup of where the collector coming back into City Hall could, in the summertime, have some problems with receiving that information and any issues there. So we actually built in dedicated fiber connections, and fortunately with the fiber ring that we already built out, we're able to piggyback off of that system. So the construction costs were far less than what we otherwise would have had to pay if we're building out these systems all on our own. So really some of the other successes of this have been, it really boosted our economic growth on the east side of our town. That area it saw some really great development from the 2014 through 2018 timeframe, and all of those have access to fiber. One other area of town that we've also built out, we had a new industrial park built probably after the start of the fiber ring construction, where one business had been out there for some time, but now if you've ever driven by Little Falls on Highway 10 and 371 right before the split, you see a new building going up. That is Barrett Pet Foods. They're a pet food manufacturer. They're based just north of Piers, south of Brainerd, and they built an expansion there. So and having fiber to that facility was really important to them because it really helps them in they have an international business model. So they do a lot of connecting with clients all over the world, as well as Airborne, which is a electronic connector manufacturer in that area. And they actually really pushed us to make a further connection to them. And hadn't we had the fiber ring already built, we would have had, again, significant investment to make a connection to one client. And furthermore, there's a school operating out there as well, Mid-State Educational District, and they operate a level 4 facility, which is treating kids with with a wide variety of needs that don't allow them to be in a classroom setting. So when the coronavirus and all these shutdowns and stay-at-home orders are done, that facility will be serving kids really directly, and they also have a large need for having this fiber connection. So it really also helped build out other areas of town that probably, and we had these investments, may not have actually built these out. The next steps that we are seeing, we're hearing a lot of demand from the residential sides, a lot of frustration with the existing providers that we have in town and who do not have really high speed, high quality internet services. They may meet the current standards of advertised speeds, but having been one of those customers, I can attest that they did not provide what they advertised and certainly didn't do it reliably. And fortunately, with our other connections and build outs from the work that the city has done, that has given us access to some residential neighborhoods, and there was last summer some construction built out into some residential neighborhoods as well. So we are looking at that in our next level of planning, and maybe a partnership again with CTC to do a construction so that we can also serve our residential community in addition to the commercial industrial sectors that we serve. So it has been a start and hopefully a long, as Bill said, a marriage and a long relationship where we can do and provide a lot of good and service of really what has become a utility for communities to have. Access to broadband is going to be incredibly important. It is incredibly important today. It will be for long into the future. And as Joe said, those fiber rings need to be built even to make the next generation of wireless systems function. That hardline infrastructure has to be there, and it's certainly going to be necessary for us to make those next steps and be an attractive community as we're learning and know we're having. Obviously, there's a lot going on with the current times, but part of my responsibility is to be thinking out into the future and what are our needs of our community beyond just the next month. We need to be focused on what are the opportunities and what are the resources that we need for our community to survive and thrive in the future. And access to high quality broadband is going to be one of them. And that's why we've been very enthusiastic about continuing these partnerships and exploring what those options are and trying to balance out the risk factors in our capacity for making some infrastructure investments with the opportunities and the operations that we've seen and trust that CTC has provided for our area. And as well, there's providers throughout the state. I came from another area of the state that had great service providers too that were doing a lot of work in very rural settings as well. So it isn't, as Joe said, it isn't just necessary that you have to go with them or with one provider. There are a lot of different folks throughout the state that can do this work. But for those in those operations, it's a tough investment for them to make, and it really is truly millions of dollars that need to take place. So if you are in a community setting, that's something that we need to consider in providing and making sure that we can get this done, because it's really difficult in our rural communities to make that, and for the private sectors to actually pull the trigger and make those investments, because the returns are not going to be what they necessary or what are necessary for them in order to maintain their operations.
Good. Thank you, John. That was great. And it's interesting that the returns were good enough for CTC that they were able to buy that network out.
Yeah, in less than 5 years.
So there is a market there, but there is the risk too. So
yeah, exactly.
Lowering the risk, and a 30-year infrastructure is not necessarily much of a risk these days with the idea of fiber optics being so essential. So I really congratulate your team there in Little Falls that made that happen. That was a big effort.
Yeah, and I really got to give credit. I should name them because I wasn't a part of that. I came after that was built, and I really want to give credit to Carol Anderson from Community Development in Morrison County and Lori Casella, our finance officer. They were the two that were most instrumental and locally into making this partnership happen.
Great, thanks for doing that. Next up is Rick Utek from Todd County Development Corporation. Long Prairie is the county seat of Todd County, and has a long history of technology with one of the Minnesota's major printers. Was there for years and faced connectivity challenges back as long as I've been in this business. So I'm not sure what they're doing now, or what their present state is, but Rick, tell us about Long Prairie's journey to fiber.
Long Prairie, basically, it's a population about 3,500 people. There are about 2,200 jobs within the county itself, about 1,100 jobs within the city. Our largest employees were having issues with service going out, and it wasn't really a good situation. But prior to 2015, the Todd County Broadband Committee met with providers, and a couple we didn't get a chance to meet with, but we met with them and talked about options we could work with it. And one of those was CTC. And the community was underserved at that time. The largest employer, like I said, had issues with their payroll program, and they had to actually shut down their office for a couple of days because the network was oversubscribed. In 2015, we looked at the incumbent providers to see if they could do something else and maybe help us out, but we really got nowhere with it. And that's when the city got involved, and they looked at doing a study with help from economic development partners, and the city retains CNS Cooperative Network Services to do the analysis and the engineering study for the project. And this was for the Blandin broadband, for the Blandin border-to-border program. And what happened, the application was finished. It was about a $6.4 million total application. I'm not sure the amount that went into that was asked for. Well, it was challenged by two of the incumbents, and basically the application was tossed out. So that wasn't a very good situation for the city. As our development corporation helped them kind of navigate through a lot of this stuff. It was, we went forward into 2016, the city actually looked at, okay, do we spend the money to take and, go through the application process again and apply for it? And the big issue was the study itself. The length of time, there's only so much of a shelf life for a study like that. So the city decided in 2016 to go ahead and bond for the project. And how they decided to bond for it was to pay for it was using tax abatement dollars to do the bond, to help pay that, but then also lease the fiber back and to CTC, which worked out pretty well. Basically, the city itself came through pretty well. We had a lot of businesses who were really happy with the new services. The service they received was about 1 gig at least. You know, yeah, that was for residential fiber to the home. I don't know what the take rate, but I think it was pretty high for the businesses in town to get in that. And the fiber was built out through just the city borders itself, and hopefully plans in the future to build it out further into the outlying areas. But as I said before, they plan to pay for the bonds with tax abatement through tax abatement dollars, and then lease back to make those payments to CTC. And all I can say is the service was really good. We had the issues we had with our encumbered providers. I noticed that we just could not get the businesses in town. That was one of the biggest concerns. We didn't have the capacity, the pipeline to help certain businesses and also bring other businesses in town. So it was really an economic development issue for us. In post-install, like I said, we have a number of the incumbents are coming back the last 2 years. We've had weekly mailings by the incumbents on trying to get service back. I'm not sure what the take rate is for CTC. Maybe you can talk about that now, Joe, but we do see some improved service now from the incumbents just because of this. And the city itself is doing well. I think the bond would be paid off, I think it's about 8 years, 9 years maybe. You could probably answer that better, but overall, it was another way of funding this type of a project.
I think what you saw happen in Long Prairie is as members of the community left the incumbent providers and got on fiber, it enabled those people who remained on the traditional copper plants, their service improved because there were fewer people using the plant. It's not that the incumbents really did anything, they just have fewer people using their networks, so the service improved a little bit. But it's important to highlight what Rick talked about is they certainly did increase their advertising and their marketing efforts. In particular, the cable company got really aggressive and is spending a lot of marketing dollars, and so that it's a tough go. There's a lot of effort into getting people to switch services.
It's interesting when we see the providers compete, having that third wire into a community where there's 3 wired providers really makes for a different marketplace. If you were to check the pricing of larger incumbents in places where they have competition now, like Long Prairie or in Brainerd or Bemidji or other places where rural telephone co-ops have built or where municipals have built, the price structure is much different than it is in places where there's no competition. Excuse me, there's feeling that providers can make a go of it if they can get something over 40% take rate as incumbents. And of course, you can get easily 40% out of 100%. But once you add a third provider into the community, it's no longer possible for every provider to have 40%. And so that's when the competition really starts.
I think you're right there, Bill. We had, back when we did our Wi-Fi program here in Todd County to try to get some service to, especially kids in school, to go to a place where they could send their information to the teachers. I noticed that one community that had multiple providers, their rates were compared to the city with the competition and not were half as much. So competition just does drive the price down a little bit. The one thing too is on the business models, we worked, CTC being a cooperative was really easy to work with. You can put that business model out there longer, and I believe corporations usually, the private corporation providers are, usually you see a 7-year window to retain it, get back all their investments. So it's that's probably one big reason why they're not really hitting, or that was the reason they're not really hitting the rural areas more. But cooperatives are able to do more of a model that works with the communities.
You know, it's interesting, Rick, that you say that, because I realized when you talked about, you know, selecting a partner, I actually forgot one of my slides, and I'm going to show that now. And it is a set of partnership principles that Blandin Foundation has developed over the years. And you can see here, complementary mission, values and culture, commitment to inclusion, trust and respect, balance of power, clear and open communication, partnership improvements, establish partnership roles and processes, reality-based, willingness to share credit, long-term and flexible perspective. So these are great principles when you think about who it is that you want to partner with. If you're looking to partner with an existing incumbent provider, you know, it's how's that road going to be as you think about these kind of attributes. Or selecting a new provider partner, you know, is that organization, if you look at their mission statement, how many of these words appear in their mission statement? And I think clearly cooperatives have a lot of these words in their mission statements.
Mm-hmm.
And so that just drives a smoother transition on that partnership. If you think about the long-term nature of a cooperative's commitment to its members, you know, to its customers, that is a lot different than somebody who says, well, you know, we need to make our model work in a specific number of months as opposed to years. And I think that's a big differentiator between a cooperative and a publicly traded company is time frame and perspective. Do we have any other questions or comments for the speakers?
Hey, this is Alex. I have a question for Rick, perhaps, if I
Sure.
may. Yeah. Did the city do the bonding?
Yes, they did. Yes.
So that makes you a major owner in the system. Is that correct?
The city of Long Prairie owns the network
Okay. And
system.
does anybody else have a piece of it at all? The co-op or anybody?
I think, I'm not sure on how that works, Joe, as far as I haven't seen the actual contract, but I think it's, I assume maybe the CTC take it over after so many years, or what?
We've done some of these things differently. They're not always the same, but in Long Prairie's instance, we had 3 contracts. And so the first contract is a construction agreement that says CTC will manage the construction of the network, will pay for the construction of the network, and then submit certified reimbursement requests to the city.
Okay.
And the city used the proceeds from the bond issuance to reimburse CTC. And then that contract gets closed out once the construction is completed. Then the second is a lease agreement, and CTC enters into a lease agreement with the city that says we will operate the network, manage the network, offer services over the network, and we'll pay the city X amount. In this case, it was I believe we're on a 10-year lease with the city. We might be on a 20-year lease. I'd have to check. And then we have a third agreement, and the third agreement is really important because it impacts the amount of lease money CTC is willing to pay for the network, and that is a right of first refusal to purchase the network.
Okay.
So from our perspective, if we're going to pay lease amounts that are going to cover the entire cost of constructing the network or something close to that, we want to have a guarantee that at the end of the term, we're going to own the asset. If the city wants to own the asset long term and evaluate other providers in the future, that is completely okay by us. It's just going to impact the amount of the lease payment we're going to be able to make back to the city.
Mhm. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was very good information.
Thanks, Alex. Any other questions or comments? Other communities considering jumping into an arrangement like this? Well, okay, that's fine. We're about at our time. And so, Mary, do you want to close us out?
I sure will. Well, so in just a minute, I'm going to formally close up this webinar and turn off the recording, but please do stick around for a half an hour. If we'll be on this line for a half an hour if you want to talk about this or any other broadband related topic. Yes. So on Tuesday at 9 a.m., we're going to continue this webinar series on creating successful broadband infrastructure projects with feasibility studies. For more information on this series and links to join, visit www.broadband.blandinfoundation.org and click on the webinars banner. Thank you, Bill, and thank you, Rick, Joe, and John for joining us on today's webinar. You can check out the recording and share the link with your friends today later on the Blandin on Broadband blog. We do encourage you sharing this with your friends and colleagues. Thanks for attending and have a great rest of your day.